In JavaScript, you can use label to apply a label for a scope of statements or maybe an individual statement as well. And if you just want to move directly to a particular label, which is being specifically designed for some purpose, you can use break and continue statements for that. It will also solve a major problem of break and continue, in which the break and continue can only get applied to the nearest for loop. So using that, you can also work on the nested for loop to break the entire chain of the looping statement. Let's see with a couple of examples. So in this example here, we'll just try to build a normal to scope, a general block level scope, and identify how the break will work with that. So let's say, for example, I can write a normal code like this. Let me just do it normal way first. I can say here 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a pretty straightforward one, and we'll be able to see all these values. Now what I want to do, I want to divide this code into two blocks. It might be a simple in this case, but when you're creating a complex application, you want to club together inside a block. So we may need that. So for example, this logic of work, I want to block separately. So what I'll do, I'll create a separate code block for this. It is not any function. It is just a simple block. There is no difference between the previous execution and current execution now if I execute it. It's the same one. What's the only difference I'm getting here? It is creating a separate block for this, and this is a separate block. And if I use a variable, let's say for example, I or something, I can only use this variable inside the current block. I can't access it over here or maybe here as well. This is the only difference. Now, let's understand at this particular moment on line number 5, something occurred here that I need to terminate the current block execution. So the line number 1 executed, and here some activity happened. Maybe some error or runtime error or something happened. I need to terminate the remaining execution of this block. I need to terminate that. So how I will do that? I'll just use a break statement. But when I'm using a break here, I'm not inside a loop, right? So I'm not inside a loop. I need to say that I need to break this particular block. If I was inside a loop, so the break can understand I need to terminate the loop. But right now I'm inside a normal block, which is not named with anything. It's an anonymous block, we can say. So we need some name for this block so that we can mention here you need to break which block. So I'll create a label here. The name I'll give first. So I'm creating a quick label here, which is which can be written in with this syntax here. So the blog is now named with a label that is called first. And now I need to break it. I can just say break first, this one. So it is breaking the code block, which is labeled with first. So with this, it can easily understand, okay, fine, I need to break the execution for the current block with the name first, and it will not execute the line number 6 and everything. And you can also see if you hover the cursor, it will also show you it's an unreachable code because we are breaking it. In production scenario, there can be some other production or maybe runtime related issues due to which you need to break, but here we are doing it manually. Let's see the outcome. So we should able to see the one, then the break will happen, no further execution, and immediately it will come outside of the block and it will continue the remaining execution. Let's see. That's perfect. So the first block, which was holding two statements, only the first statement get executed and the second is not getting executed. Let's try to understand the similar scenario with multi-dimensional array where we are using the nested for loop, and the problem how we cannot come out of the main loop, or maybe how we can break the chain of the looping using a break statement. So let me just comment this and create a quick multi-dimensional array here. It's a super simple multi-dimensional array, and I want to apply looping on this. While doing a looping, I need to first give a name here called temporary array, because initially I'll get a temporary array when I'm looping over the main array. And inside this temporary array, I'll getting my elements. So for that, again, I'll perform one more looping. where I'll give the name called element. And here I'll say temporary array. Let me add a quick console now to display this element. Let's see. Yes, we are getting a perfect outcome and we are able to travel around these all elements in a systematic way using a nested for loop. Now there is a problem. For example, here there is a null value. So when there is a null value coming over here, we don't want to further execute this for loop. We just want to terminate it for the current loop only, for the current array only. So where exactly that happening? It's happening in this for loop. So when temporary array is holding the value called 10, null, and the 30, this one. So for the first 10, it's all good. It will get printed here that we can see. That's perfect. But when it is coming with a null in the second element, there it is printing the null value. So what we need to do now, as soon as we are detecting a null, we need to break the execution for the further elements for the current array only. So we can simply do that by break. So when I'm mentioning the break, I don't need to mention any block here now because I'm inside a loop. So it can detect a loop and it can break the nearest available loop. So which is the nearest available loop in this case? The current for loop. So with this, the further execution will not happen for the number 30 or something. And it will come out of this loop immediately. And then the outer for loop, which is a main for loop in our case, will execute the remaining things. It will continue the execution for the next array, which is this 40, 50, and the 60. But now in our case, as soon as we are detecting a null, we don't want to just terminate the current loop. We also want to terminate the outside main loop as well, which is not possible in this case. If you just see the outcome for the current code, after the 20, immediately the current inside loop it is getting terminated, and that's the reason you are not able to see the 30. But remaining all you are able to see because the main for loop is continued like before. That's the reason we are getting 10, 40, 50 like this. But as soon as you're detecting a null, you want to terminate outer for loop as well. So for this, there is a need of a label now. So for this particular break, you cannot say directly you can break the outer for loop or something because it can only detect the nearest loop. So you need to label something. How you will label? So you can say the first or maybe the main loop like this. And for inside loop, you can say child loop. That's good. So now it's very easy to understand. So if I say here, I need to break the child loop. So it was the previous thing that we were doing, right? Without this also, it is breaking the nearest loop. But still, try with this. It's the same. But if I want to break the main loop, I can do that now. Let's see, after the 10, as soon as if I'm getting a null, all the execution for all the remaining elements will terminate now. And that's what we need. So this is how it works. Let's try to understand the continue statement as well. So with continue statement, what we will do, we'll mention the continue here. So what will happen if I will not mention the label here with continue? So for this, for example, it's 10. That's good, no problem. It's a null. Then we are saying continue. So continue means you should continue the execution for the remaining elements of the current array. So in output, you should able to see 10, 30, and all the remaining. Let's see. That's perfect. But if you want to continue the outer for loop, the main for loop, how you will do that? So for that, you need to mention continue main loop. So with this, as soon as we are getting a null, instead of continuing with the next one, it will continue directly on the main loop and next array itself. Let's see the output. So after 10, we should start getting 40, 50 and all. That's perfect. Now, you might be thinking this can also be done when I'm just writing a break here, right? Like this, because it will break the current loop and immediately it will start with the next arrays here. It's a similar behavior. It might not sound well in the current scenario, But there can be different scenario where only the break will not be sufficient. Maybe there will be more nested for loop. We are only having the two-dimensional array. There can be three-dimensional, four-dimensional, or more. So this is how the label works with break and continue and allow us to jump to a particular statement or to continue from a particular statement in JavaScript.